Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Book 1, The Lightning Thief, by Riordan. Chapter 4, My Mother Teaches Me Bullfighting. We tore through the night alongside country roads, wind slamming against the Camaro, rain lashing the windshield. I didn't know how my mom could see anything, but she kept her foot on the gas. Every time there was a flash of lightning, I looked at Grover sitting next to me in the back seat, and I wondered if I had gone insane, or if he was wearing some kind of shag carpet pants. But no, the smell was one I remembered from kindergarten field trip to the petting zoo. Lanolin, like from wool. The smell of a wet barnyard animal. All I could think to say was, "So, you and my mom know each other." Grover's eyes fluttered to the rearview mirror, though there was no cars behind us. "Not exactly," he said. "I mean, we've never met in person, but she knew I was watching you." "Watching me?" "Keeping tabs on you, making sure you're okay." "But I wasn't fake being your friend," he added hastily. "I am your friend." What are you, exactly?" "That doesn't matter right now." "It doesn't matter? From the waist down, my best friend is a donkey." Grover let out a sharp, throaty bah. I've heard him make that sound before, but I've always assumed it was just a nervous laugh. Now I realize it was more of an irritated belt. "Goat," he cried. "What?" "I'm a goat from the waist down." "You just said it didn't matter." "Bah! There are satyrs who would trample you under hooves for such an insult." "Whoa, wait, satyrs? You mean like Mr. Brenner's myths?" "Were those old ladies in the fruit stand a myth, Percy? Was Mrs. Dodds a myth?" "So you admit there was a Mrs. Dodds?" "Of course." "Then why—" "The less you knew, the fewer monsters you'd track," Grover said, like that should be perfectly obvious. "We put mist over your human eyes. We hoped you would think the kindly ones was hallucinations, but it was no good. You started realizing who you were." "Who, I? Wait a minute, what do you mean?" The weird bellowing noise rose again somewhere behind us, closer than before. Whatever was chasing us was still on our tail. "Percy," my mom said, "there's too much to explain and not enough time. We have to get you to safety." "Safe from what? Who's after me?" "Oh, nobody much," Grover said, obviously still miffed about the donkey comment. "Just the Lord of the Death and a few of his bloodthirsty minions." "Grover!" "Sorry, Mrs. Jackson. Can you drive faster, please?" I tried to wrap my mind around what was happening, but I couldn't do that. I knew this wasn't a dream. I had no imagination. I could never dream up something this weird. My mom made a hard left. We swerved into a narrowing road, racing past darkening farmhouses and wooden hills. The "Pick Your Own Strawberry" sign on white picket fence. "Where are we going?" I asked. "A summer camp I told you about." My mother's voice was tight. She was trying for my sake to not be scared. "The place your father wanted to send you." "The place you didn't want me to go." "Please, dear," his mother begged. "This is hard enough. Try to understand. We're in danger." "Because some old ladies cut yarn." "Those weren't old ladies," Grover said. "Those were the fates. Do you know what that means? The fact that they appeared in front of you. They only do that when someone's about to die." "Whoa, you said you." "No, I didn't. I said someone." "You meant you, as in me." "I meant you like someone, not you. Boys," my mom said. She pulled the wheel hard to the right. I got a glimpse of the figure she swerved to avoid. A dark, fluttering shape, now lost behind us in the storm. "What was that?" I asked. "We're almost there," my mother said, ignoring my question. "Another mile. Please, please, please." I don't know where there was, but I found myself leaning forward in the car, anticipating, wanting us to arrive. Outside, nothing but rain and darkness. The kind of empty countryside you get all the way out on the tip of Long Island. I thought about Mrs. Dodds and the moment when she changed into that thing with pointed teeth and leathery wings. My limbs went numb from displayed shock. She really hadn't been human. She meant to kill me. Then I thought about Mr. Brenner and the sword he had thrown at me, because I could ask Grover about that. The hair rose on the back of my neck. There was a blinding flash and a jaw-rattling boom, and our car exploded. I remember feeling weightless, like I was being crushed, fried, and hoisted down all at the same time. I peeled my forehead off of the back of the driver's seat and said, "Ow." "Percy," my mom shouted. "I'm okay." I tried to shake off the daze. I wasn't dead. The car hadn't really exploded. We swerved into a ditch. Our driver's side was wedged in the mud. The roof was cracked open like an eggshell, and rain was pouring in. Lightning. That was the only explanation. We'd been blasted right off the road. Next to me in the back seat was a big, motionless lump. "Grover." He was slumped over, blood trickling from the side of his mouth. I shook his furry hip, thinking, "No, even if you are half barn animal, you're my best friend. I don't want you to die." He groaned, "Food," and I knew there was hope. Percy, my mom said. We have to. Her voice fluttered. I looked back. In the flash of lightning, the mud-sputtered rear windshield, I saw a figure limbering towards us on the shoulder of the road. The sight of it made my skin crawl. It was dark, silhouetted of a huge guy, like a football player. He seemed to be holding a blanket over his head. The top half was bulky and fuzzy. His unraised arms made it look like he had horns. I swallowed. Who is Percy? My mom said, deadly serious. Get out of the car. My mom threw herself against the driver's side door. It was jammed shut in the mud. I tried mine. Stuck too. I looked up desperately at the hole in the roof. It might have been an exit, but the edges were sizzling and smoking. Climb out the passenger side, my mom told me. Percy, you have to run. Do you see that big tree? What? Another flash of lightning, and through the smoking hole in the roof I saw the tree she meant. A huge White House Christmas tree, sized pine, in the crest of the nearest hill. That's the property line, my mom said. Get over the hill, and you'll be in a big farmhouse down the valley. Run and don't look back. Yell for help. Don't stop until you reach the door. Mom, you're coming too. Her face was pale. Her eyes were sad as she looked at the ocean. No, I shouted. You are coming with me. Help carry Grover. Food, Grover moaned a little louder. The man with the blanket on his head kept coming towards us, making his grunting, snorting noises as he got closer. I realized he couldn't be holding a blanket over his head, because his hands, huge, meaty hands, were swinging at his sides. There was no blanket, meaning the bulky, fuzzy mess that was too big to be his head was his head. And the points that looked like horns? He doesn't want us, my mom told me. He wants you. Besides, I can't cross the property line. But we don't have time, Percy. Go, please. I got mad then. Mad at my mom. At Grover. But go. At a thing with horns that was lumbering towards us, slowly and deliberately, like a bull. I climbed across Grover and pushed the door open into the rain. We're going together. Come on, Mom. I told you. Mom, I'm not leaving you. Help me with Grover. I didn't wait for her to answer. I scrambled outside, dragging Grover from the car. He was surprisingly light, but I couldn't have carried him very far if my mom hadn't come to my aid. Together we draped Grover over our shoulders and stumbled uphill through the wet, waist-high grass. I glanced back and got my first clear look at the monster. He was 7 feet tall, easy. His arms and legs were something on the cover of Muscle Man magazine. Bulging biceps and triceps and a bunch of other eps all stuffed like basketballs under vein web skin. He wore no clothes except for underwear. I mean, bright white Fruit of the Loom, which would have looked funny except for the top half of the body was so scary. Coarse brown hair starting at his belly button and got thicker as it reached his shoulders. His neck was a mass of muscles and fur leading up to his enormous head, which had a snout as long as my arm. Snotty nostrils with gleaming brass rings, cruel black eyes and horns, enormous black and white horns, with points you just couldn't get from any electric sharpener. I recognized the monster all right. It had been in one of the first stories Mr. Brenner told us, but it couldn't be real. I blinked the rain out of my eyes. That's Pacificius' son, my mom said. I wish I'd known how badly he wanted to kill you. But he's the Mint. Don't say his name, she warned. Names have power. The pine tree was still too far away, 100 yards uphill at least. I glanced back behind me again. The bullman hunched over our car, looking in the windows. Not looking, exactly, more like snuffling and nuzzling. I wasn't sure why he bothered, since we were only about 50 feet away. Food, Grover moaned. Shh, I told him. Mom, what's he doing? Doesn't he see us? His sight and hearing are terrible, she said. He goes by slow, but he'll figure out where we are soon enough. As if on cue, the bullman bellowed his rage. He picked up Gabe's Camaro by the torn roof. The chassis cracking and groaning, he raised the car over his head and threw it down the road. It slammed into the wet asphalt and skidded into a shower of sparks for about half a mile before coming to a stop. The gas tank exploded. Not a scratch, he remembered Gabe saying. Oops. Percy, Mom said. When he sees us, he'll charge. Wait until the last second, and then jump out of the way. Directly sideways. He can't change directions very well since he's charged. Do you understand? How do you know all of this? I've been worried about an attack for a long time. I should have expected this. I was selfish keeping you near me. Keeping me near you, but... Another bellow of rage, and the bullman started trembling uphill. He smelled us. The pine tree was only a few more yards, but the hill was getting steeper and slicker, and Grover wasn't getting any lighter. The bullman closed in. Another few seconds and he'd be on top of us. My mother must have been exhausted, but she shouldered Grover. Go, Percy. Separate. Remember what I said. I didn't want to split up, but I had the feeling she was right. It was our only chance. I sprinted to the left, turned, and saw the creature bearing down on me, his black eyes glowing with hate. He seethed like rotten meat. He lowered his head and charged, those razor-sharp horns aiming straight for my chest. The fear in my stomach made me want to bolt, but that wouldn't work. I could never outrun this thing. So I held my ground, and at the last moment I jumped to the side. The bullman stormed past like a freight train, and then bellowed with frustration and turned. But not towards me this time, towards my mother, who was setting Grover down on the grass. We'd reached the crest of the hill. Down the other side I could see the valley, just as my mother had said, the lights of the farmhouse glowing yellow through the rain. But that was half a mile away. We'd never make it. The bullman grunted, pawing the ground. He kept eyeing my mother, who now retreated slowly down the hill, back towards the road, trying to lead the monster away from Grover. Run, Percy, she told me. I can't go any farther. Run. But I just stood, frozen there, frozen with fear as the monster charged her. She tried to sidestep, as she told me to do, but the monster had learned its lesson. His hand shot out and grabbed her by the neck. As she tried to get away, he lifted her as she struggled, kicking and pummeling the air. Mom! She caught my eyes, managed to choke out one last word. Go. Then, with an angry roar, the monster closed his fist around my mother's neck. She dissolved before my eyes, melting into light, a shimmering golden form, as if she was a holographic projection. No blinding light. She was just simply gone. No. Anger replaced my fear. Newfound strength burned in my limbs, the same rush of energy I'd gotten when Mrs. Dodds grew talons. The bullman bore down at Grover, who lay helpless on the grass. The monster hunched over, sniffed my best friend as if he were about to lift Grover up and make him dissolve too. I couldn't allow that. I stripped off my red rain jacket. Hey! I screamed, waving the jacket around to one side of the monster. Hey, stupid! Ground beef! Roar! The monster turned towards me. I had an idea, a stupid idea, but better than no idea at all. I put my back on the big pine tree and waved my red jacket in front of the bullman, thinking I'd jump out of the way at the last moment. But it didn't happen like that. The bullman charged too fast, his arms out to grab me, whichever way I tried to dodge. Time slowed down. My legs tensed. I couldn't jump sideways, so I leaped straight up, kicking off the creature's head, using it as a springboard, turning in midair and landing on his neck. How did I do that? I didn't have time to figure it out. A millisecond later, the monster's head slammed into the tree, and the impact nearly knocked out my teeth. The bullman staggered around, trying to shake me. I locked my arms around his horns to keep me from being thrown. Lightning and thunder were still going strong. The rain was in my eyes. The smell of rotten meat burned my nostrils. The monster shook himself around and bucked like a rodeo bull. He should have just backed into the tree and slammed me flat, but I was starting to realize that this thing only had one gear. Forward. Meanwhile, Grover started groaning in the grass. I wanted to yell at him to shut up, but the way I was getting tossed around, if I opened my mouth, I'd bite my own tongue off. Food, Grover moaned. The bullman wheeled towards me, pawing the ground again, to get ready to charge. I thought about how he had squeezed the life out of my mom, made her disappear in a flash of light, and rage fill me like high-octane fuel. I got both hands around one horn and pulled backwards with all my might. The monster tensed, made a sharp grunt, and then snap. The bullman screamed and flung me through the air. I landed flat on my back in the grass. His head smacked against a rock. Then I sat up. My vision was blurry, but I had a horn in my hands, a ragged bone weapon the size of a knife. The monster charged. Without thinking, I rolled to one side and came up kneeling. As the monster barreled past, I drove the broken horn straight into his side, right up under his furry ribcage. The bullman roared in agony. He flared, clawing at his chest, and then began to disintegrate. Not like my mother, in a flash of golden light, but like crumbling sand, blown away in chunks by the wind, the same way Mrs. Dodds had burst apart. The monster was gone. The rain had stopped, the storm still rumbling, but only in a distance. I smelled like livestock. My knees were shaking. My head felt like it was splitting open. I was weak and scared and trembling with grief. I'd just seen my mother vanish. I wanted to lie down and cry. But then there was Grover, needing my help. So I managed to haul him up and stagger down into the valley, towards the light of the farmhouse. I was crying, calling for my mother, but I held on to Grover. I didn't want to let him go. The last thing I remember is collapsing on a wooden porch, looking over the ceiling fan circling above me, moths flying around the yellow light, and the stern faces of a familiar-looking bearded man and a pretty girl, her blonde hair curled like a princess's. They both looked down at me. The girl said, "He's the one. He must be." "Silence, Annabeth." The man said, "He's still conscious. Bring him inside." Chapter 5. I Play Pinochle with the Horse. I had weird dreams full of barnyard animals, most of them wanting to kill me, the rest wanting food. I must have woken up several times, but what I had heard and saw made no sense, so I just passed out again. I remember lying in a soft bed, being spoon-fed something that tasted like buttered popcorn, only it was pudding. The girl with curly blonde hair hovered over me, smirking as she scraped drips off my chin with the spoon. When she saw my eyes open, she asked, "What will happen at the summer solstice?" I managed to croak, "What?" She looked around as if afraid someone would overhear. "What's going on? What was stolen? We've only got a few weeks." "I'm sorry," I muttered. "I don't—" Someone knocked on the door, and the girl quickly filled my mouth with pudding. The next time I woke up, the girl was gone. A husky blonde dude, like a surfer, stood in the corner of the bedroom, keeping watch over me. He had blue eyes, at least a dozen of them, on his cheeks, his forehead, and the back of his hands. When I finally came around for good, there was nothing weird about my surroundings, except that they were nicer than I was used to. I was sitting in a desk chair with a huge porch, glazing across the meadows of green hills in the distance. The breeze smelled like strawberries. There was a basket under my legs, a pillow behind my neck. All that was great, but my mouth felt like scorpions had been using it for a nest. My tongue was dry and nasty, and every one of my teeth hurt. On the table next to me was a tall drink. It looked like iced apple juice, with a green straw and a paper parasol stuck through a maraschino cherry. My hands were so weak I almost dropped the glass, once I got my fingers around it. "Careful," a familiar voice said. Grover was leaning against the porch railing, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. Under one arm he cradled a shoebox. He was wearing blue jeans, Converse high tops, and a bright orange t-shirt that said Camp Half-Blood. Just plain old Grover, not the goat boy. So maybe I'd had a nightmare. Maybe my mom was okay. We were still on vacation, and we'd stopped here at the big house for some reason. And you saved my life, Grover said. Well, the least I could do. I went back to the hill. I thought you might want this. Relevantly, he placed the shoebox on my lap. Inside was a black and white bull's horn, the base jagged from being broken off, the tip sputtered with dried blood. That wasn't a nightmare. "The Minotaur," I said. Percy, that isn't a good idea." "That's what they call him in Greek myths, isn't it?" I determined. "The Minotaur, half man, half bull." Grover shifted uncomfortably. "You've been out for 2 days. How much do you remember?" "My mom, is she really—" He looked down. I stared across the meadows. There were groves of trees, winding streams, acres of strawberries spread out under the blue skies. The valley was surrounded by rolling hills. The tallest ones, directly in front of us, was the one with a huge pine tree on top. Even that looked beautiful in the sunlight. My mother was gone. The whole world should be black and cold. Nothing should look beautiful. "I'm sorry," Grover sniffed. "I'm a failure. I'm the worst satyr in the world." He moaned, stomping his foot as hard as it came off. The Converse high top came off. The inside was filled with styrofoam, except for a hoof-shaped hole. "Oh, sticks," he muttered. Thunder rolled across the clear sky. As he struggled to get his hoof back onto his fake foot, I thought, well, that settles it. Grover was a satyr. I was ready to bet that if I shaved his curly brown hair, I'd find tiny horns on his head. But I was too miserable to care if satyrs existed, or even minotaurs. All that meant was my mom had really been squeezed into nothingness, dissolved in a yellow light. I was alone, an orphan. I would live with Smelly Gabe? No, that would never happen. I would live on the streets first. I would pretend I was 17 and join the army. I'd do something. Grover was still sniffling. The poor kid, poor goat, satyr, whatever, looked as if he expected to be hit. I said, "It wasn't your fault." "Yes, it was. I was supposed to protect you." "Did my mother ask you to protect me?" "No, but it was my job. I'm a keeper. At least I was." "But why?" I suddenly felt dizzy, my vision swimming. "Don't strain yourself," Grover said. "Here." He helped me hold my glass and put the straw on my lips. I recoiled at the taste, because I was expecting apple juice. But it wasn't that at all. It was chocolate chip cookies. Liquid cookies. And not just any cookies. My mom's homemade blue chocolate chip cookies, buttery and hot, with the chips still melting. Drinking it, my whole body felt warm and good, full of energy. My grief didn't go away, but I felt as if my mom had just brushed her hand against my cheek, given me a cookie the way she used to when I was small, and told me everything was going to be okay. Before I knew it, I'd drained the glass. I stared into it, sure it had been a warm drink, but the ice cubes hadn't even melted. Was it good? Grover asked. I nodded. What did it taste like? He sounded so wistful. I felt guilty. Sorry, I said. I should have let you taste. His eyes got wide. No, that's not what I meant. I just wondered. Chocolate chip cookies, I said. My mom's. Homemade. He sighed. And how do you feel? Like I could throw Nancy Buffett 100 yards. That's good, he said. That's good. I didn't think you could risk drinking any more of that stuff. What do you mean? He took the empty glass from me gingerly, as if it were dynamite, and set it back on the table. Come on, Kyron and Mr. D are waiting. The porch wrapped all the way around the farmhouse. My legs felt wobbly trying to walk that far. Grover offered to carry the Minotaur horn, but I held on to it. I'd paid for that souvenir the hard way. I wasn't going to let it go. As we came around the opposite end of the house, I caught my breath. It must have been on the north shore of Long Island, because on this side of the house, the valley marched all the way up to the water, which glittered about in mile distances. Between here and there, I couldn't simply process what I was seeing. The landscape was dotted with buildings that looked like ancient Greek architecture. An open-air pavilion, an amphitheater, a circular arena, except that was all looked brand new, the white marble columns sparkling in the sun. In a nearby sandpit, a dozen high school-age kids and satyrs playing volleyball. Canoes gliding across the small lake, kids in bright orange t-shirts like Grover's were chasing each other around in clusters of cabins nestled in the woods. Some shot targets at an archery range, others rode horses down the wooded trails, and unless I was hallucinating, some of those horses had wings. Down at the end of the porch, two men sat across from each other at a card table. The blonde-haired girl who spoon-fed me popcorn-flavored pudding was leaning in the porch railing next to them. The man facing me was small but porky. He had a red nose, big, watery eyes, and a curly hair so black it was almost purple. He looked like those paintings of baby angels. What did they call them? Hublops? No, cherubs. That's it. He looked like a cherubim, who turned middle-aged in a trailer park. He wore a tiger-patterned Hawaiian shirt, like he would have fit right in one of Gabe's poker parties. Except I got the feeling this guy could have out-gambled even my stepfather. That's Mr. D, Grover muttered to me. He's the cabin director. Be polite. That girl, that's Annabeth Chase. She's just a camper, but she's been here longer than just about anyone. And you've already know Kyron. He pointed to the guy whose back was towards me. First, I realized he was sitting in a wheelchair. Then I recognized the tweed jacket, the thinning brown hair, and straggly beard. Mr. Brenner? I cried. The Latin teacher turned and smiled at me. His eyes had a mischievous glint they sometimes got in class, when he pulled a pop quiz and made all of the multiple-choice answers B. Oh, good, Percy, he said. Now we have 4 for Pinnacle. He offered me the chair to the right of Mr. Brenner, who looked at me with bloodshot eyes, and heaved a giant sigh. Oh, I suppose I must say it. Welcome to Camp Half-Blood. There, now don't expect me to be glad to see you. Oh, thanks? I scooted a little farther away from him, because if there was one thing I had learned from living with Gabe, it is how to tell when an adult has been hitting the happy juice. If Mr. D was a stranger to alcohol, I was a satyr. Annabeth, Mr. Brenner called to the blonde girl. She came forward and Mr. Brenner introduced us. This young lady nursed you back to health, Percy. Annabeth, my dear, why don't you go check on Percy's bunk? We'll be putting him in cabin 11 for now. Sure, Kyron, Annabeth said. She was probably my age, maybe a couple inches taller, and a whole lot more athletic-looking. With her deep tan and her curly blonde hair, she was almost exactly what I had thought a stereotypical Californian girl would look like, except her eyes ruined the image. They were startling gray, like storm clouds, pretty but intimidating too, as if she were analyzing the best ways to take me down in a fight. She glanced at the Minotaur horn in my hand, then back at me. I imagined she was saying, "You killed a Minotaur," or "Wow, you're so awesome," or something like that. Instead she said, "You drool in your sleep," then sprinted off down the lawn, her blonde hair flying behind her. So, I said, anxious to change the subject, you, work here, Mr. Brenner? Not Mr. Brenner, the ex, Mr. Brenner said. I'm afraid that was a pseudonym. You can call me Chiron. Okay. Totally confused, I looked at the director, and Mr. D. Does that stand for something? Mr. D stopped shuffling the cards. He looked at me like I belched loudly. Young man, names are powerful things. You don't just go around using them for no reason. Oh, right. Sorry. I must say, Percy, Chiron Brenner broke in, I'm glad to see you alive. It's been a long time since I've made a house call to a potential camper. I'd hate to think I've wasted my time. A house call? My year at Yancey Academy, to instruct you. We've had satyrs at most schools, of course, keeping a lookout, but Grover alerted me as soon as he met you. He sensed you were something special, so I decided to come upstate. I'd convinced the other Latin teacher to, take leave of absence. I tried to remember the beginning of the school year. It seemed so long ago, but I did have a fuzzy memory of there being another Latin teacher my first week at Yancey. Then, without explanation, he had disappeared and Mr. Brenner had taken the class. You came to Yancey to teach me? I asked. Guy nodded. Honestly, I wasn't sure about you at first. We connected through your mother, let her know that we were keeping an eye on you in case you were ready for Camp Half-Blood. But you still had too much to learn. Nevertheless, you made it here alive, and that's always the first test. Grover, Mr. D said impatiently, are you playing or not? Yes, sir. Grover trembled as he took the fourth chair, though I didn't know why he should be so afraid of a pudgy little guy in a tiger print Hawaiian shirt. You do know how to play pinochle. Mr. D eyed me suspiciously. I'm afraid not, I said. I'm afraid not, sir, he said. Sir, I repeated. I was liking the camp director less and less. Well, he told me, it is along with gladiator fighting and Pac-Man, one of the greatest games ever invented by humans. I will expect all civilized young men to know the rules. I'm sure the boy can learn, Chiron said. Please, I said, what is this place? What am I doing here, Mr. Brenner? Chiron, why would you go to Yancey Academy just to teach me? Mr. D snorted. I asked the same question. The camp director dealt the cards, and Grover flinched every time one landed in his pile. Chiron smiled at me, sympathetically, the way he used to in Latin class, as if to let me know that no matter what my average was, I was his star student. He expected me to have the right answer. Percy, he said, didn't your mother tell you nothing? She said, I remembered her eyes sad, looking out over the sea. She told me she was afraid to send me here, even though my father had wanted her to. She said that once I was here, I probably couldn't leave. She wanted to keep me closer to her. Typical, Mr. D said. That's how they usually get killed. Young man, are you bidding or not? What? I asked. He explained impatiently how to bid in pinochle, and so I did. I'm afraid there's too much to tell, Chiron said. I'm afraid our usual orientation film won't be sufficient. Orientation film? I asked. No, Chiron decided. Well, Percy, you know your friend Grover's a satyr. You know, he pointed to the horn in the shoebox, that you have killed a minotaur. No small feat either, lad. What you may not know is that great powers are at work in your life. Gods, the forces you call the Greek gods, are very much alive. I stared at the others around the table. I waited for someone to yell, not, but all I got was Mr. D yelling, oh, a royal marriage. Trick, trick, he cradled as he tallied up his points. Mr. D, Grover said timidly, if you're not going to eat it, can I have your Diet Coke can? Oh, all right. Grover bit a huge shred out of the empty aluminum can and chewed it mournfully. Wait, I told Chiron, are you telling me there's such thing as God? Well now, Chiron said, God, capital G, God, that's a different matter altogether. We shouldn't deal with the metaphysical. Metaphysical? But you were just talking about, gods, plural, as in great beings that control the forces of nature. The human endeavors, the immortal gods of Olympus. That's a smaller matter. Smaller? Smaller? Yes, quite. The gods we discussed in Latin class. Zeus, I said. Hera, Apollo, you mean them? And there it was again, distant thunder on a cloudless day. Young man, Mr. D said, you really should be less casual about throwing those names around, if I were you. But they're stories, I said, they're myths, to explain lightning and the seasons and stuff. They're just people believed before there was science. Science, Mr. D scoffed, and tell me Perseus Jackson. I flinched when he said my real name, which I never told anyone. What will people think of your science 2,000 years from now? Mr. D continued. Well, they call it primitive mumbo-jumbo. That's what. Oh, I love mortals. They have absolutely no sense of perspective. They think they come so far. And have they, Chiron? Look at this boy and tell me. I'm not liking Mr. D much, but there was something about the way he called me mortal, as if he wasn't. It was enough to put a lump in my throat, to suggest why Grover was so dutifully minded in his cards, chewing his soda can and keeping his mouth shut. Percy, Chiron said, you may choose to believe or not, but the fact is that immortals mean immortals. Can you imagine that for a moment never dying, never fading, existing just as you are for all of time? I was about to answer, off the top of my head, that it sounded like a pretty good deal, but the tone of Chiron's voice made me hesitate. You mean whether people believe in you or not? I said, exactly, Chiron agreed. If you were a god, how would you like being called a myth, an old story to explain lightning? What if I told you, Perseus Jackson, that someday people will call you a myth, just created to explain how some little boy could get over losing his mother? My heart pounded. He was trying to make me angry for some reason, but I wasn't going to let him. I said, I wouldn't like it, but I don't believe in gods. Oh, you'd better, Mr. T muttered, before one of them incinerates you. Grover said, please, sir, he's just lost his mother. He's in shock. A lucky thing, too, Mr. D grumbled, playing the card. Bad enough I'm confined to this miserable job, working with boys who don't even believe. He waved his hand and a gauntlet appeared on the table, as if the sun had bent momentarily and woven the glass into air. The goblet filled itself with red wine. My jaw dropped, but Chiron hardly looked up. Mr. D, he warned, your restrictions. Mr. D looked at the wine, in frigid surprise. Dear me, he looks at the sky and yells. Old habits. Sorry. Some thunder. Mr. D waved his hands again, and the wineglass changed into a fresh can of Diet Coke. He sighed unhappily, popping the top of the soda, and went back to his card game. Chiron winked at me. Mr. D offended his father a while back. Took a fancy to a wood nymph who had been declared off limits. A wood nymph? I repeated, still staring at the Diet Coke can like it was from outer space. Yes, Mr. D confessed. Father loves to punish me. The first time, probation, ghastly, absolutely horrid, 10 years. The second time, well, she really was pretty, and I couldn't stay away. The second time he sent me here, Half-Blood Hill, summer camp for brats like you. Be a better influence, he told me. Work with youth rather than tearing them down. Ha, absolutely unfair. Mr. D sounded about 6 years old, like a pouting little kid. And I stammered, your father is De Immortalis, Chiron. Mr. D said, I thought you taught this boy the basics. My father is Zeus, of course. I ran through D names from Greek mythology, wine, the skin of a tiger, the satyrs that all seemed to work here. The way Grover cringed as if Mr. D was his master. You're Dionysus, I said, the god of wine. Mr. D rolled his eyes. What do they say these days, Grover? Do the children say, well, duh? Yes, Mr. D. Well then, well, duh. Percy Jackson. Do you think I was Aphrodite, perhaps? You're a god. Yes, child. A god. You. He turned to look at me straight on, and I saw this kind of purplish fire in his eyes, a hint that his whiny, plump little man was only showing me the tiniest bit of his true nature. I saw visions of grapevines, choking unbelievers to death, drunken warriors insane with battle lust, sailors screaming as their hands turned to flappers, their faces elongated into dolphin snouts. I knew that if I pushed, Mr. D would show me much worse things. He would plant a disease in my brain that would leave me wearing a straitjacket in a rubber room for the rest of my life. Would you like to test me, child? He said quietly. No, no, sir. The fire died a little, and he turned back to his card game. I believe I won. Not quite, Mr. D, Chiron said. He set down the straight, tallied the points, and said, the game goes to me. I thought Mr. D was going to vaporize Chiron right out of his wheelchair, but he just sighed through his nose as if he were used to being beaten by the Latin teacher. He got up and Grover rose too. I'm tired, Mr. D said. I believe I'll take a nap before the sing-along tonight. But first, Grover, we need to talk, again, about your less-than-perfect performance on this assignment. Grover's face beaded with sweat. Yes, sir. Mr. D turned to me. Count 11, Percy Jackson, and mind your manners. He swept into the farmhouse, Grover following miserably. "Will Grover be okay?" I asked Chiron. Chiron nodded, though he looked a bit troubled. "Old Dionysus isn't really mad. He hates the job. He's been, grounded, I guess you could say. But he can't stand watching another century before he's allowed back to Olympus." "Mount Olympus," I said. "You're telling me there really is a palace there?" "Well, now, there's Mount Olympus in Greece, and then there's the home of the gods, the convergency point of their powers, which did indeed used to be Mount Olympus. It's still called Mount Olympus, out of respect for the old ways. But the palace moves, Percy, just as the gods do." "You mean the Greek gods are here, like in America?" "Well, certainly. The gods move with the heart of the West." "The what?" "Come now, Percy. What you call Western civilization, do you think it's just an abstract construct? No, it is a living force, a collective consciousness that has burned bright for thousands of years. The gods are part of it. You might even say that they are the source of it. Or at least, they are tied so tightly to it that they couldn't possibly fade, not unless all of Western civilization was obliterated. The fire started in Greece. Then, as you well know, or I hope you know, since you passed my course, the heart of the fire moved to Rome, and so did the gods. Oh, different names perhaps, Jupiter for Zeus, Venus for Aphrodite, and so on. But the same forces, the same gods. And then they died. Died? No. Did the West die? The gods simply moved. To Germany, to France, to Spain. For a while. Wherever the flame was brightest, the gods were there. They spent several centuries in England. All you need to do is look at the archaeologists. People do not forget the gods. Every place they've ruled for the last 3,000 years. You can see them in paintings and statues on the most important buildings. And yes, Percy, of course they are now in your United States. Look at your symbol, the eagle of Zeus. Look at the statue of Prometheus in Rockefeller Center. The Greek facade of your government building in Washington. I defy you to find any American city where the Olympians are not prominently displayed in multiple places. Like it or not, and believe me, plenty of people weren't very fond of Rome either. America is now at the heart of the flame. It is the great power of the West. And so Olympus is here. And we are here. It was too much, too fast, especially the fact that I seemed to be included in Chiron's "we," as if I were part of some club. "Who are you, Chiron? Who am I?" Chiron smiled. He shifted his weight as if he were about to get up from his wheelchair, but I knew that that was impossible. He was paralyzed from the waist down. "Who are you?" he mused. "Well, that's the question we all wanted answers to, isn't it? But for now, we should get you to your bunk in cabin 11. There will be new friends to meet, and plenty of time for lessons tomorrow. Besides, there will be s'mores at the campfire tonight, and I simply adore chocolate." And then he did rise from his wheelchair, but there was something odd about the way he did. His blanket fell away from his legs, and his legs didn't move. His waist kept getting longer, rising above his belt. At first, I thought he was wearing very long, white velvet underwear. But as he kept rising out of the chair, taller than any man, I realized that the velvet underwear weren't underwear. It was the front of an animal, muscle and sinew under coarse white fur. And the wheelchair wasn't a chair. It was some kind of container, an enormous box on wheels. And it must have been magic, because there is no way it could have held all of him. A leg came out, long and wobbly-kneed, with a huge polished hoof. Then another front leg, then hindquarters, then the box was empty. Nothing but a metal shell with a couple of fake human legs attached. I stared at the horse who had just sprung from the wheelchair, a huge white stallion. But where his neck should be was the upper body of my Latin teacher, smoothly grafted into a horse's trunk. "What a relief," the centaur said. "I've been cooped up in there so long. My footlocks have fell asleep. Come on, Percy, let's meet the other campers." End of chapter 5.